My name is Serena Maddox. I'm 34 years old. I served 11 years in the Army as a combat medic with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I've been deployed more times than I care to count, and I've buried more friends than I ever imagined I would. What I never expected, what I was never trained for, was the day my own family would drag me into court and try to erase my honor in public. The courtroom was freezing that morning. Or maybe it was just me. I sat on the edge of a wooden bench, the air thick with cologne perfume and judgment. My sister Clara sat across the aisle, legs crossed, polished perfect, unmoved. Beside her, my mother, Evelyn Maddox, widow of the late Colonel Robert Maddox, clutched her pearl necklace like it could protect her from the shame of my existence. I wasn't nervous. That feeling had burned out of me somewhere between Kandahar and Ghazni. But I was aware, hyper-aware of the glances, the stares, the under-the-breath scoffs. And then they called my name. Serena Maddox, please approach the stand. I stood slowly, my boots echoed across the marble floor like gunfire in an empty hallway. I wore my old navy blue dress uniform, pressed and clean, and on my left chest, pinned exactly 2 fingers above the heart, was the Medal of Honor. Before I could even raise my right hand to swear in, my mother stood up suddenly, violently, and shouted across the courtroom, her voice trembling but loud, "You don't deserve that. Remove it." Every neck turned. Even the stenographer stopped typing. My sister didn't even flinch. Instead, she leaned in and added with a smirk, "Fake veteran." The bailiff moved toward them, whispering something inaudible. The judge raised a hand but didn't speak. No one did. I looked straight ahead. I didn't argue, didn't plead. I simply reached up, unpinned the Medal of Honor from my chest, and placed it on the table beside the microphone. Gently, respectfully. As if it were still sacred, even if they didn't believe it. The room fell dead silent. No papers rustled, no shoes shuffled. Even the air held its breath. And that's when I noticed the judge's eyes drop to the plaque, then rise slowly to meet mine. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. That moment when I laid down the one thing that had kept me tethered to the world was the most humiliating thing I had ever done. And I had been shot twice, lost 3 ribs, and watched friends bleed out in a burning Humvee. But nothing compared to this. My own mother shouting me down, my sister calling me a fraud, and no one, not one single person, standing up to say she earned that. I sat down without looking at anyone, my hands folded in my lap. The space where my medal had been felt colder than anything I'd felt overseas. Clara's attorney stood confidently, smoothed his lapel, and stepped forward. "Your Honor, we maintain that Miss Maddox, despite her claims of service, has manipulated the Maddox estate during a period of emotional duress. She moved into the property uninvited, overrode medical directives, and has since attempted to assert control over assets not legally hers." He gestured toward a screen where a grainy photo of me was displayed, sitting on the edge of my father's hospital bed, holding his hand. Another photo, me in the backyard opening the old tool shed. They made it look like I'd broken in, like I'd forced my way back into a home I had once built pillow forts in. He continued, "This case is not about military medals or dramatic outbursts. It's about property rights and the exploitation of an elderly man in declining health." The words slid across the floor like oil on ice. Slick, cold, dangerous. I didn't say a word. My court-appointed attorney had advised me not to speak. Not yet. Not until we could present our evidence. But so far, we hadn't even been given the chance. They were painting me as a manipulative parasite, and the court was nodding along. Murmurs rippled through the spectators. Some were reporters, others family friends who hadn't spoken to me since I enlisted. They glanced at me, then looked away. One woman shook her head. Another whispered to her neighbor. I knew what they were thinking. How dare she show up in uniform and expect sympathy? They didn't see the years I spent patching up soldiers younger than me, dragging them through dust and blood and gunfire, whispering lies like, "You're gonna be okay," even when I knew they weren't. They didn't see the nights I sat by my father's bedside, changing his dressings, helping him breathe through the pain, waiting for him to say one kind word he never did. Instead, what they saw was a disgrace. A woman with a medal she shouldn't have. A daughter trying to steal a house she didn't earn. A soldier who had apparently faked it all. And I let them believe it, for now. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that sometimes silence is sharper than any rebuttal. And when the moment comes, When truth finally walks through the door, it doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen. And that moment, it was coming. But until then, I sat in that courtroom stripped of my title, my history, and my father's name. Waiting, watching, enduring. Because I had survived worse. And I knew how to win a war without ever firing back. Not yet, but soon. 6 months before my father collapsed, I was still at war. Not overseas, back home at the Maddox estate in Virginia. I'd been called back from active duty early. He'd suffered a minor stroke or so, they said. I arrived on a humid afternoon and found the house quiet, too quiet. When I walked in, the living room was empty, except for my father seated in his favorite leather chair. He looked smaller, like someone had folded him up, tucking the edges in and making him fit into less space. I knelt by the chair and felt the rise and fall of his breath. I reached for his hand. It felt frail, a worn rope unraveling at the ends. For 8 years, my father had barely touched me. We wore our distance like armor. But in that moment when he closed his eyes and I brushed his fingertips, he didn't pull away. He held on. Then he opened his eyes and looked at me. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That look said more. My mother, Evelyn, was in the bedroom. She didn't come out when I arrived. She didn't come out for days. I heard her crying by the window, quiet sobs behind closed doors. Clara was across the country in Austin handling a corporate merger she said was urgent. She didn't call, didn't visit. She texted once some days later. Hope he gets better. I didn't call anyone else. I didn't tell them how close he came. I didn't tell them I was there holding him, asking him to breathe, telling him over and over, "It's okay. You're okay." I lied to him to make him believe it. He recovered slow and messy. For 3 months I stayed in that old brick house with peeling paint and overgrown vines. I slept in his guest room, rinsing out uniform patches in the bathroom sink at night. Mornings I helped him sit up, set out eggs and toast on a tray. I shifted his IV bags. I held the flashlight for him when he could barely see. I wiped sweat from his forehead during the first summer heat wave and rubbed his back as he fell asleep. On his bad days, he was quiet. On his better days, he stared at me late at night like he was memorizing my face. One night I caught him staring at my uniform folded on a chair. He whispered, "You did good, proud." I swallowed hard. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, blinked back tears, then left the room. The community whispered I was back for inheritance. They didn't see that every morning I woke to patch him together. They didn't know the smell of antiseptic. They didn't know how I spent hours reading his favorite military memoir, trying to spark conversation. He never asked me about medals, deployment scars. He never talked about the war. He never once said, "Serena, you're the best of us." But I saw it in him. I felt it in his hold of my hand. It was September when he fell again, harder this time. So next time, hospital staff called me first. I ran down the porch steps in my uniform shirt and rain boots, no dress blues. I didn't need ceremony then. I just needed to get him to safety. When the ambulance came, Mother appeared on the sidewalk in slippers and a robe. She didn't speak when I rushed past her to hold my father's hand again. Clara flew home 2 days later. And then he died. I held his hand in the hospital room. I told him it was okay for him to rest. He squeezed my fingers once and let go. He left this house to me. I inherited the burden and the echoes of silence between us. I inherited the responsibility of keeping his memory alive while my own family turned against me. During those 3 months, I learned more about him than any promotion or medal ever taught me. I learned patience. I learned humility. I learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is just show up. And after he died, they called me selfish. They called me manipulative. They said I'd taken advantage of his illness. They called me a homeowner, not a daughter. What they didn't know was how much I'd bled caring for him. What they didn't know was how much I'd held him in war and in recovery. What they didn't know was that my silence while caring for him was love, not motive. I didn't argue. I didn't post photos. I didn't respond to the rumors. I had learned earlier that noise cannot drown out trust. Trust is built in quiet moments. But when they brought those accusations into court, I realized silence wasn't enough anymore. I rose from that house the day he died. I walked out wearing boots scuffed with soil and heart bruised with loss. I carried his memory in my uniform pocket. I carried my service and my story. Now I carry them here into that courtroom again. Only this time I won't stay silent. Because I know what silence can hold and what it can finally release when the right moment arrives. 6 months before my father collapsed, I was still at war. Not overseas, back home at the Maddox estate in Virginia. I'd been called back from active duty early. He'd suffered a minor stroke or so, they said. I arrived on a humid afternoon and found the house quiet, too quiet. When I walked in, the living room was empty, except for my father seated in his favorite leather chair. He looked smaller, like someone had folded him up, tucking the edges in and making him fit into less space. I knelt by the chair and felt the rise and fall of his breath. I reached for his hand. It felt frail, a worn rope, unraveling at the ends. For 8 years, my father had barely touched me. We wore our distance like armor, but in that moment when he closed his eyes and I brushed his fingertips, he didn't pull away. He held on, then he opened his eyes and looked at me. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That look said more. My mother, Evelyn, was in the bedroom. She didn't come out when I arrived. She didn't come out for days. I heard her crying by the window. Quiet sobs behind closed doors. Clara was across the country in Austin handling a corporate merger she said was urgent. She didn't call, didn't visit. She texted once some days later. Hope he gets better. I didn't call anyone else. I didn't tell them how close he came. I didn't tell them I was there holding him, asking him to breathe. Telling him over and over, "It's okay. You're okay." I lied to him to make him believe it. He recovered slow and messy. For 3 months I stayed in that old brick house with peeling paint and overgrown vines. I slept in his guest room, rinsing out uniform patches in the bathroom sink at night. Mornings I helped him sit up, set out eggs and toast on a tray. I shifted his IV bags. I held the flashlight for him when he could barely see. I wiped sweat from his forehead during the first summer heat wave and rubbed his back as he fell asleep. On his bad days, he was quiet. On his better days, he stared at me late at night like he was memorizing my face. One night, I caught him staring at my uniform folded on a chair. He whispered, "You did good." Proud. I swallowed hard. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, blinked back tears, then left the room. The community whispered I was back for inheritance. They didn't see that every morning I woke to patch him together. They didn't know the smell of antiseptic. They didn't know how I spent hours reading his favorite military memoir, trying to spark conversation. He never asked me about medals, deployment scars. He never talked about the war. He never once said, "Serena, you're the best of us." But I saw it in him. I felt it in his hold of my hand. It was September when he fell again, harder this time. So next time, hospital staff called me first. I ran down the porch steps in my uniform shirt and rain boots, no dress blues. I didn't need ceremony then. I just needed to get him to safety. When the ambulance came, Mother appeared on the sidewalk in slippers and a robe. She didn't speak when I rushed past her to hold my father's hand again. Clara flew home 2 days later. And then he died. I held his hand in the hospital room. I told him it was okay for him to rest. He squeezed my fingers once and let go. He left this house to me. I inherited the burden and the echoes of silence between us. I inherited the responsibility of keeping his memory alive, while my own family turned against me. During those 3 months, I learned more about him than any promotion or medal ever taught me. I learned patience. I learned humility. I learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is just show up. And after he died, they called me selfish. They called me manipulative. They said I'd taken advantage of his illness. They called me a homeowner, not a daughter. What they didn't know was how much I'd bled caring for him. What they didn't know was how much I'd held him in war and in recovery. What they didn't know was that my silence while caring for him was love, not motive. I didn't argue. I didn't post photos. I didn't respond to the rumors. I had learned earlier that noise cannot drown out trust. Trust is built in quiet moments. But when they brought those accusations into court, I realized silence wasn't enough anymore. I rose from that house the day he died. I walked out wearing boots scuffed with soil and heart bruised with loss. I carried his memory in my uniform pocket. I carried my service and my story. Now I carry them here into that courtroom again. Only this time I won't stay silent. Because I know what silence can hold and what it can finally release when the right moment arrives. There was a time I believed my father hated me, not because he said it, but because of how loudly he said nothing. It was senior year. I'd just withdrawn from law school mid-semester. I didn't tell anyone until it was already done. I remember walking into the kitchen of our house, wearing jeans, a hoodie, and a duffel bag slung across my shoulder. My mother stood by the sink polishing wine glasses we never used. My father sat at the head of the table reading the Wall Street Journal. "I'm not going back," I said. No theatrics, no speech. My mother paused for half a breath. Then she resumed drying the glass like I hadn't spoken. My father lowered the paper an inch, just enough for his eyes to meet mine. The disappointment in them didn't sting, it burned. I could already feel it tightening in my chest. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "I dropped out," I answered. He folded the paper slowly, deliberately, placed it on the table, pushed his chair back, stood up. "You're the first Maddox to quit anything," he said. I nodded. "I'm enlisting," I said. The room cracked open. The silence was so sharp I could hear the ice melt in the water glass beside him. He walked toward me, stiff military posture still intact. Then, before I had time to step back, he slapped me across the face. Just once. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, but hard enough to knock something loose. Maybe it was respect, or fear, or the last thread I had left of being his daughter. "You are not taking our name and dragging it through the dirt," he snapped. I stood there steady, didn't cry, didn't yell. I just looked at him and said, "I'm not dragging it through the dirt. I'm just not hiding behind it anymore." He turned and left the room. My mother still hadn't spoken. She hadn't turned around. When I left for basic training 3 weeks later, she didn't come to the airport. He didn't write, no one called. Not on graduation, not when I earned my stripes. Not even when my name showed up in the Army Times after my first deployment. They acted like I'd vanished. But I didn't vanish. I changed. And it was in the desert that I learned something else, something no family lesson had ever taught me. Silence in war zones is deadly. It's the moment right before an IED goes off. It's the stillness before sniper fire cuts through the dust. It's the gap between screams when someone realizes they're bleeding too fast to stop it. At home, silence had been the punishment. With my mother, it was a slow suffocation, a room you were in but never acknowledged. With my father, it was something you had to earn your way back into. But in combat, silence was survival. And sometimes silence meant someone had died before they could scream. So I learned to read quiet like a language. I learned to hear the tremble in breath, the difference between discipline and panic. I became fluent in things people didn't say. That's why years later, when my father had his first stroke and couldn't form words, I didn't need him to speak. I already understood silence better than most people understood sound. But back then, after that slap in the kitchen, I thought I'd lost everything. My place, my father, my worth. What I didn't realize was that I had traded their silence for one I could live with my own. The Army didn't ask me to prove my bloodline. It asked me to prove my backbone. And when it did, I gave it everything. I gave it 18-hour days in combat boots. I gave it my sleep, my knees, my sanity. I gave it friends I loved and couldn't save. And somewhere along the way, I stopped looking back at the kitchen table, at the man who stood there, thinking he could break me with his silence and a slap. Because I had stepped into a world where people yelled to live. And in that world, my silence became a weapon, not a wound. I never told my family any of this. Not when I came back with medals. Not when I earned the one they said no woman would ever earn. Because you don't hand your story to people who never asked for it. You build a new one, quietly, steadily, and if they don't hear it, that's on them. The courtroom was colder that morning, not physically, but in the way people looked at me. It was the second day of the trial. Clara had arrived wearing black, though our father had died nearly 6 months ago. She sat beside our mother like a dutiful daughter, her arm lightly around Mom's shoulder, eyes lowered just enough to appear mournful, but not enough to miss the cameras. And then she stood, calmly, too calmly. "Your Honor," she said with permission, "I'd like to submit a short video for the court to consider. It was taken from the hallway camera outside my father's room, recorded the night before his passing." My attorney didn't object. He didn't even look surprised. The judge nodded. The screen lit up. There I was, pixelated but recognizable, standing just outside Dad's bedroom door. "You never respected me," my voice echoed from the speakers. "All I ever did was try." You disrespected the family name, came his reply, muffled but audible. You never wanted a daughter. You wanted a soldier you could parade in courtrooms and country clubs. And look at what you became, he snapped. Silence. Then I turned, hand trembling on the doorknob, voice breaking just enough to sound harsh. Maybe I became what you made me. The video cut off. That was it. Just that. No context. No full recording. No next moments where I walked back in, dropped to my knees, and told him I was sorry. That I didn't want to win the argument. I just wanted him to know I stayed because I loved him. Not because I had something to prove. But that part wasn't in the clip. Clara had cut it, and the courtroom ate it up. There was an audible shift in the air. Whispers, a few headshakes. The jurors stiffened. Even the bailiff glanced away. My mother sniffled, pulling out a tissue from her clutch. With such elegance you'd think she rehearsed it. She dabbed under her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Fake. I watched the entire performance without blinking. When the judge asked if I had a response, I stood slowly and approached the microphone. I could have explained. I could have told them what really happened. That he'd grabbed my wrist later that night and whispered, I was too hard on you. I didn't know how to love you the way you needed. I could have described how his fingers curled around mine, fragile and warm for the first time in 8 years. How he asked me if I believed in second chances. How I told him yes, but I didn't say a word. I looked at Clara. She smirked just enough for only me to see it. I looked at my mother. She couldn't meet my gaze. Then I turned back to the judge, cleared my throat, and said, No response, Your Honor. He nodded, confused. I returned to my seat. My attorney leaned in, whispered, We could ask to cross-examine the footage. I shook my head. Let them talk. But they're painting you. I know, I interrupted. There was a pause. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Because here's the truth. I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was done performing for people who only showed up to watch me fall. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I didn't need to claw for sympathy. I had already lived through worse than public opinion. I had marched through war zones where silence meant survival. I had survived nights in medical tents watching soldiers younger than Clara bleed out from decisions they didn't get to make. Compared to that, a doctored clip in a courtroom was just another version of battlefield noise. So I sat there, still, straight-backed, calm. Let them misunderstand me. Let them judge. Because truth doesn't need applause to be true. It just needs to be lived, and I had already lived it. The judge adjusted his glasses and sighed. You could feel it, the room winding down as if the outcome was inevitable. He began shuffling papers, tapping them once against the desk. That signature movement lawyers know well. A prelude to closure. I gripped the edge of the table not out of desperation, but out of a need to feel something solid. Everything else felt fluid. The glances, the silence, the quiet betrayal of the very people who'd once given me their name. This court is prepared to issue a preliminary finding, the judge began. And that's when the door opened. At first, no one moved. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft creak, almost an apology for interrupting. But the moment he stepped in, the room shifted. He didn't walk, he arrived. Tall, almost imposing. His silver hair cropped close. Shoulders still proud despite age. Dressed not in a civilian suit, but in his old military uniform, neat and pressed. Every pin and ribbon told a story no courtroom could fabricate. General Avery Lynwood. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Even the judge paused, mouth still half open. The man beside me, my attorney, whispered, That's Lynwood. The Lynwood. My mother's lips parted. Her hand flew up to her chest. Clara's face turned pale. I saw it happen second by second, the smug superiority dissolve into something that looked a lot like fear. General Lynwood walked to the center of the room, uninvited. He did not ask for permission to speak. He simply looked at the judge and said, Sir, I have something to say. She doesn't need to prove anything today. I'm here because I'm the one she saved. It was the first time in days that every face in the courtroom turned away from me. He looked directly at Clara, then my mother, then me. His voice didn't tremble. I was trapped under the wreckage near Kunduz, he said. Our convoy had taken heavy fire. Half the men were gone, radio dead, blood everywhere. And through the smoke, she appeared, alone, dragging one of our boys over her shoulder, rifle slung across her back. bullet in her thigh. I told her to leave me. She refused. He paused. She said, "We don't leave anyone behind." And she carried me half a mile. I begged her to save herself. She just said, "You're not dead yet, sir. Let's keep it that way." No one breathed. He turned to the judge again. "Whatever character they've painted here today, I need you to understand something. I owe my life to her. And I don't say that lightly. If Serena Maddox says she loved her father, she did. If she says she cared for him when no one else did, she did. Because she doesn't perform. She acts. Always." He stepped back. Silence. Even the stenographer had stopped typing. The judge looked stunned. He blinked several times as if trying to reboot a stalled mind. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Clara sat frozen knuckles white against her thigh. But I remained still. Because this wasn't vindication. It was just truth finally being allowed to stand. General Lynwood walked toward me, slowly, deliberately. When he reached me, he extended his hand. I stood, took it. Then he did something no one expected. He saluted. To me. Every muscle in his arm precise. Every breath controlled. A soldier's gesture, not given lightly, not performed for cameras. The judge stood too, quietly, as if the gravity in the room had shifted. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. But I felt for the first time in weeks the weight in my chest shift just a little enough to breathe again. And in that moment, I knew they could tear down my name. They could twist the memories. But they could never rewrite the truth of what I carried. Or who I had carried. Because honor isn't something you hang around your neck. It's something you carry in your spine when no one's watching. General Lynwood didn't sit. He remained at the center of the courtroom, still as a monument, then slowly reached inside his coat pocket. This, he said, is the original Medal of Honor nomination packet filed 7 years ago. Not by me, not by the unit, but by Colonel Franklin Maddox. He held it up, a sealed folder with government markings. The courtroom leaned forward, the air suddenly charged like static before a storm. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, not from surprise, but from disbelief. Father Clara's jaw shifted. She blinked, confused. My mother blinked faster, as if hoping the moment would vanish if she could just outpace it. He opened the folder slowly, pulled out a crisp official document with a heavy gold seal in the corner. At the bottom, in blue ink that hadn't faded a bit, "Call Franklin Maddox," my father's signature. The room stirred. You could hear phones being unlocked. Clara pulled hers out, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. I could guess what she was looking up. How long does it take for a Medal of Honor to be approved? Can families be notified? "Our nomination's confidential," General Lynwood continued. Colonel Maddox submitted this nomination through classified channels. It was during the height of a regional blackout. He asked me to keep it quiet. He said, Lynwood paused, locking eyes with me. He said he didn't want the army to turn her into a poster girl before she was ready. I felt the floor slip slightly, not because it hurt, but because I had spent years assuming my father didn't believe in me, only to realize now that he had quietly fought for me behind closed doors I never had keys to. He had nominated me 7 years ago, and he never told me. Never told anyone. Lynwood turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, this nomination was eventually lost in the bureaucracy. The file was buried after a reassignment, but I've kept it, because I knew someday she might need it." I looked down. My hand had moved on its own, now resting over my heart, right where my Medal of Honor had hung before I took it off. I didn't need to say anything. The question echoed in my chest. Why did he hide it from me? I hadn't seen that version of him in years. The man who taught me to ride a bike. The man who made me memorize Army field codes just for fun. The one who turned ice cream into reward currency after Sunday drills. That man disappeared the day I said I was leaving law school. That was the last time he slapped me. Not out of rage, but of shame, disappointment. He called me a disgrace. He told me I had humiliated the Maddox name, and I left. Now, years later, I stood in a courtroom with my mother's tears like knives and my sister's accusations like acid, and learned that the man who rejected me had once tried to honor me in the highest way possible. Not publicly, but quietly, secretly, and maybe in his own language, lovingly. Clara raised her voice. "There's no proof it's authentic that could be forged." Lynwood turned sharper this time. This packet was logged in Fort Belvoir's secure archive system. You can check the reference number. It's all there. Dated, witnessed, sealed. The judge gestured for the clerk to collect it. The courtroom clerk rose, stepped forward, and gently took the folder from Lynwood's hands. The moment felt ceremonial, sacred. I didn't look at Clara. I didn't look at my mother. I looked only at the folder. Because inside it wasn't just proof. It was a confession, a truth he hadn't known how to say. Or maybe he'd been waiting for the right moment. Maybe he'd run out of time. But now the world knew. And so did I. 6 years ago. Camp Dagger. There are places your mind doesn't go until something pulls it back. Sitting in that courtroom, seeing the nomination letter in General Lynwood's hands, I wasn't in Virginia anymore. I was under desert heat again, gear heavy on my back, rifle jammed, and the radio full of static. Operation Harvest Falcon. We were 6. By the end, just me. I still remember the smell burnt metal singed cloth and the sharp stink of panic. It was supposed to be a recon sweep. Minor, no contacts, but someone fed bad intel. We walked into a kill zone. The explosion took Reyes and Donovan in seconds. I dragged Stafford 50 yards through shrapnel, covered Martinez's bleeding neck with my only dry bandage, shot my way through 2 ambushes, sent out 5 distress flares. When the Black Hawk finally came, my hands were trembling so bad I couldn't even load my own sidearm. I was 19, and the only one breathing. They medevaced me out. I stayed in silence for days. Didn't speak a word until Lynwood visited me in the recovery ward. He didn't say I'm proud, he just sat. Left a small slip of paper with one sentence, "Your silence saved lives." I found out later that someone had filed for Medal of Honor nomination. I never knew who. No one told me. It was only whispers in the hallway she should have gotten it. Politics blocked it, too sensitive. I believed it. I believed it had been rejected because of how messy it was. I was a girl from a family known for lawyers and diplomats. Not soldiers, not headline makers. But the truth came slowly like oil leaking through cracks. Weeks before the mission, Dad had sent me a letter. I never opened it. I'd been angry. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years by that point. I found that letter again after the trial started. Still sealed, yellowing at the edges. When I finally opened it, it said, "Don't let them turn you into something you're not. If you want to serve, serve, not perform." Now I understood what it meant. He hadn't pulled the nomination to erase me. He'd done it to protect me. General Lynwood confirmed it in a hallway outside the courtroom later that day. "Your father didn't trust the process," he said. "He saw what happened to other medal recipients. The press camps outside your house. The interviews twisting grief into glory. He said you'd earned it, but he wouldn't let Washington turn you into a symbol to feed headlines." I looked away. Was it protection or control? A part of me still didn't know. But another part, quiet, tired, older, understood that love comes in strange forms. Some fathers say I'm proud. Others write letters you never open. Some speak to you through old documents tucked away in dusty safes. And sometimes they hide your highest honor so no one else can exploit it. Back at Camp Dagger during those debriefings, they asked me if I wanted a formal ceremony, medal or no medal. A recognition. I declined. I wasn't ready. Not because I didn't believe I'd done something right, but because I hadn't yet made peace with why I was the only one still breathing. And maybe my father knew that. I walked back into the courtroom that day, not as the broken daughter trying to defend herself, but as the soldier who had walked through hell and come out the other side without needing to be seen. They stripped the medal from me in public, but I remembered what Lynwood once said. Some medals you wear on your chest, others you carry in your spine. I was standing by the courthouse window when General Lynwood joined me. People were still whispering inside, stunned by the revelation of the Medal of Honor letter, but my mind was elsewhere, somewhere colder, somewhere heavier. He didn't speak at first, just handed me something folded in thirds. I opened it slowly. It was a handwritten note, familiar scrawl, slanted letters, my father's. Only 7 words. Let her live in peace, not in pain. Below that, a line of instruction addressed to Lynwood directly. Don't let them turn her into another sacrifice. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe. Lynwood's voice broke the silence. He told me to lock the paperwork away. Said he couldn't bear the thought of you being dragged in front of cameras. He saw how the media devoured other veterans, especially women. I nodded slowly, but it didn't reach my chest. He was afraid, Lynwood added. Not of you, but for you. I clenched the note in my hand. That fear, I said, voice dry, left me buried under silence. Do you know what it's like to walk back into your own home and feel like a rumor, like a walking disappointment? He looked away. Yes, I do. My throat tightened. My father's silence, his desire to protect, had a cost. I was shunned at every dinner. Whispers followed me at family gatherings. Clara called me the girl who ran. My mother pretended I was just on a long vacation. No one asked why I enlisted. No one asked how I slept at night. Instead, they filled in the blanks with their own stories. I was reckless, unfilial, a stain on the Maddox name, the daughter who threw away Harvard law for boots in the mud. All that because he didn't want them to see my face on TV. He could have told me, I said quietly. Lynwood sighed. He said you had enough to carry: guilt, memory, war. He thought silence was mercy. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking slightly. He was wrong, I whispered. Silence isn't mercy. It's a sentence. I thought back to the day I came home months after Camp Dagger. Clara met me at the airport, gave me a hug that felt like PR, then went straight to asking when I'd reapply to law school. Dad shook my hand stiffly, didn't mention the deployment, didn't mention the Bronze Star I'd earned weeks earlier, and Mom, she stayed upstairs. That night I sat alone on the porch, drinking weak coffee and staring at the garden Dad used to tend before his heart gave out. He came out eventually, said nothing, just sat beside me, then muttered, I'm glad you came home. That was it. No, I'm proud. No, how are you? Now I knew why. He'd decided my story had to stay buried to keep me safe. But the irony is, in trying to protect me from the public, he left me defenseless at home. Clara twisted the silence into shame. My mother wore it like perfume, and me, I swallowed it whole. I turned to Lynwood. Why did you come forward now? His eyes held something old, heavy, because your father died. And you're still alive. It hit me hard. There were layers to this I hadn't seen. My father wasn't just controlling. He was terrified, haunted by the idea that his daughter, his soldier, would be remembered for a headline, not her heart. He didn't trust the world with my truth, but in choosing silence, he let my family bury me under assumptions. And maybe he thought I'd understand one day, that when the dust settled, I'd piece it together and forgive him. And I almost had. Almost. But that night alone in the hallway, I realized protecting someone doesn't mean erasing them. Love, real love, requires being seen even in pain, even when it's inconvenient, even when it hurts. Lynwood handed me the letter again. You can keep this, he said. It's yours now. I tucked it into my coat, not because I forgave him yet, but because I knew it was time to stop being silent for someone else's comfort and start speaking for myself. The judge was preparing to deliver her preliminary ruling when my attorney, Mr. Kellerman from the Legal Veteran Defense Initiative, raised his hand. Your Honor, he said calmly, with the court's permission, we would like to submit one final piece of evidence. The courtroom hushed again. Judge Linton gave a single nod. Proceed? Kellerman stepped forward, holding a flash drive in his palm, like it weighed more than the courthouse itself. This footage was recovered from a private in-room security system in Colonel Maddox's residence. It was never published, never edited, and never disclosed to any party, including my client, until 2 nights ago. He inserted it into the court's presentation system. For a few seconds, the screen stayed black. Then it lit up with a date 6 months ago. The footage showed my father lying in his bedroom. He looked thinner than I remembered, his color pale, oxygen tubes at his nose. But his eyes, they were awake, clear. A timestamp blinked in the corner. It was recorded 3 days before he died. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of a ceiling fan and the soft beeping of medical equipment. Then he spoke. His voice was hoarse, but unmistakable. If anything happens to me, he began, I need this on record. I felt my whole body stiffen. He turned his head slightly toward the camera. There was no one else in the room. Just him, and the red light blinking. I've made arrangements for Clara and Evelyn. They won't like it, But this house, this land, it belongs to Serena. She earned it, not through blood, through burden. Clara's face went white. Mom gasped, visibly shaken. She held my hand when I couldn't breathe. He continued, coughing slightly. She bathed me when I couldn't stand. She sat outside my room every night, for months. And I never thanked her. I failed her once already. When she left for service, I didn't stop her. I didn't understand her. He paused, swallowed. Then softer than ever, but I do now. Silence. Not in the courtroom, there were murmurs, sharp intakes of breath, a few stunned gasps, but in me. A silence different from the one I'd carried. This one was lighter. The clip wasn't over. I know Evelyn won't accept this, neither will Clara. But this house, it was built by my hands, yes, but it was kept alive by hers. Serena deserves peace, even if it has to come from me when I'm gone. Then after a long, hard breath, I'm sorry. The screen went dark, no music, no swelling emotional cue, just silence. Judge Linton didn't say anything at first, neither did anyone else. The video had landed like a stone in a lake ripples, moving through each corner of the courtroom. Clara stood still, blinking, as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. My mother turned her face down and wiped beneath her eyes, but whether it was shame or disbelief, I couldn't tell. As for me, I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and touched the folded letter from General Lynwood. Then the Medal of Honor recommendation. Then finally my own chest, where my name had long felt like a whisper no one heard. Now it echoed. Kellerman's voice was calm but direct. As you can see, Your Honor, this statement combined with the General's sworn testimony confirms the Colonel's final wishes, not only as a father but as a legal property holder. The judge turned to me. Miss Maddox, do you wish to make a statement before I proceed? I stood, straightened my back, then said simply, No, Your Honor. He already did. I sat back down, because for the first time in years, my silence was no longer mistaken for absence. It was presence, weight, intention. It was proof that sometimes the truth isn't loud. It just waits for the right moment to speak. And in that courtroom, in front of the people who once erased me, my father had finally said my name. The courtroom hadn't yet recovered from the video footage when Judge Linton leaned forward, brows furrowed. Before this court renders a ruling, I've just received a sealed statement submitted by opposing counsel regarding a new witness willing to testify under oath. Clara's face twitched just slightly, but enough. The doors opened again. This time, it wasn't a general in full regalia who entered. It was a woman in a simple charcoal suit, clutching a worn purse and avoiding all eye contact. But I recognized her instantly. Nurse Danielle Hale, my father's private caregiver. She hadn't returned my calls since the funeral. She'd vanished right after the estate was sealed. I thought she moved to Arizona. I was wrong. She was subpoenaed. I understand you requested to give your statement under oath, Judge Linton said, her voice low but firm. Nurse Hale nodded. Yes, Your Honor, I need to say this. Her voice trembled, but not from nerves, from conscience. I was Colonel Maddox's nurse for the last 4 months of his life, she began. He trusted me. He confided in me. And after he passed, I made a decision I regret every day. She reached into her purse and placed something on the evidence table. A second flash drive. Gasps fluttered across the courtroom like a sudden breeze. I deleted the original from his in-room system, she said, almost too quietly to hear. But I made a copy. I kept it in case I couldn't live with what I did. The judge asked, why would you delete it? Danielle turned her eyes, glassy now, to Clara. Because she paid me to. A murmur rolled through the room. Clara snapped up in her seat. That's a lie. Danielle didn't flinch. She said, and I quote, make sure no stray words ruin this family's legacy. Keep it clean, no drama. Then she handed me a check for $25,000. I took it, but I never cashed it. It's still in the same drawer, because I knew it was blood money. The prosecutor for Clara tried to object, but Judge Linton held up her hand. Let her finish. Danielle's voice grew steadier. I watched Serena carry more than her weight. She never raised her voice. She never asked for praise. She never begged for the house or the title or anything. But I saw it her father changed in those last days. He loved her. He saw her. Then she held up the flash drive. This copy matches the one just played. It's proof that Clara tried to suppress his final wishes by bribing me. Clara rose. This is ridiculous. She's a disgruntled employee. Probably wants hush money now. Danielle responded without hesitation. I don't want a dime. I want my conscience back. The judge nodded slowly. We'll verify the drive and its metadata, but given this testimony, the court must weigh the implications. Clara sank back in her chair. Her perfect posture collapsed like scaffolding. The courtroom felt colder somehow, not because of the air conditioning, but because the masks were coming off. The performance was over. Clara, my sister, the face of our family's moral high ground, had orchestrated a cover-up not to protect legacy, but to erase mine. A slow realization spread through the room. The trial had never been about a house, or a will, or even my father's affection. It was about control. And Clara had just lost hers. I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I simply watched her unravel. Because some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to surface. The courtroom was dead silent. Then the gavel fell. In light of the testimonies and evidence presented, this court hereby suspends all proceedings regarding the Maddox estate. The will and video declaration of the deceased shall stand as primary legal direction. The property at 412 Kingston Drive shall remain with Ms. Serena Maddox. No one moved. Then someone behind me, an older man I hadn't noticed until now, rose from his bench seat. He was wearing a faded cap with USMC embroidered in gold thread. He stood at attention, placed his right hand over his heart, and nodded solemnly. A few more stood with him. I didn't know their names. I didn't need to. They had served too. Or maybe they had daughters too. Or maybe they had watched one woman get trampled for too long. For a moment, the courtroom turned into something sacred, not about justice, but recognition. A silent salute. I didn't cry, but my throat locked like a steel door. The judge stood and recessed the court. My mother didn't look at me. She gathered her purse carefully, as if afraid to make a sound. Then she lowered her head and walked out. Her back never once turned my way, and somehow that stung more than anything Clara had done. Outside the courthouse steps, the press swarmed. Flashes popped. Voices barked my name. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. My silence was still the loudest voice I had. Clara stood several feet from the crowd. Her hair was flawless. Her makeup didn't flinch. When the microphones pushed toward her, she didn't recoil. Instead, she smiled. I paused at the bottom step just within earshot when I heard her speak. All I did was try to protect our family's name. I never lied. I just made sure the truth didn't get distorted. That's not betrayal, it's responsibility. Her voice was clear, unwavering. A masterclass in control. Some reporters looked impressed, but some didn't. I stepped into the car, waiting at the curb. General Lynwood was already inside. He didn't say anything. He just looked ahead, hands folded like someone who'd attended too many funerals. Did you expect her to speak first? I asked. No, he replied. But I expected you not to. And he was right. I wouldn't. That night, a video went viral. Not the court footage, not the Medal of Honor proposal. Just a grainy shot of that veteran hand over heart standing alone while I sat silent, still on the stand. They called it the moment America stood up for her. It wasn't the moment I wanted, but it was the moment that would follow me. By morning, Clara had already done 3 interviews. Each one was cleaner than the last. She wore pearl earrings, a navy blazer, a steady tone. I didn't steal anything, she repeated. I protected the family from scandal. That's leadership, not manipulation. She positioned herself not as a villain, but as a misunderstood architect of order. Calculated, articulate, cold. Social media lit up. Some praised her professionalism, her poise under fire. Others called her a snake in silk. Comment threads swirled, "Would you betray your own sibling for a house?" She didn't betray anyone, she preserved legacy. Families aren't sacred anymore, just legal battlegrounds. Women like Clara give sisterhood a bad name. She did what was necessary. Stop romanticizing loyalty. Someone even started a poll. Does family loyalty outweigh the pursuit of control? It trended for 3 hours. I didn't vote. I didn't answer any of the emails either, or the texts, or the calls. I watched the news anchors read my name with practiced solemnity. I saw hashtags born, then diluted. Justice for Serena. Silent Strength Maddox Sisters. None of it felt like mine. Reporters camped near my building for 3 days. One even sent a bouquet of roses with a business card tucked in. Whenever you're ready to speak, the world is listening. But I wasn't. Because this wasn't about my voice anymore. This was about letting go. There's something about being publicly vindicated that doesn't quite taste like victory. It tastes like processed closure, engineered validation. And yet, privately, nothing felt closed. Because I still had no answers to the one question that never left me. Why didn't my father say it to me himself? He had all those final hours, all those days in silence. Why did he need a video? Maybe it's cowardice, maybe it's love, maybe it's both. People say vindication feels like rising. To me, it felt like exhaling underwater. I didn't need to prove Clara wrong. I didn't even need to be right. I just needed to walk away not carrying all of it. So I packed a bag, one duffel, one notebook, one medal, and I left town for a while. No press conference, no final statement, just silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy, it was mine. The house looked smaller than I remembered, not physically but in presence, as if time had shrunk its shadow and peeled off all the authority it used to carry. I stood at the gate for a full minute, hand on the latch, listening to the creak of wind brushing the hedges. The paint had chipped along the porch rail. The bell didn't ring when I pressed it. Dust settled on the windows like old regrets that refused to be wiped away. Still, I opened the door and stepped in. This was the house where I learned to march before I learned to rest, where silence was rewarded and softness mistaken for weakness. But it was also where my father once told me with a whiskey glass in hand and a rare softness in his voice, "You're the only one in this family who'd burn the house down to save the foundation." I never understood what he meant. Now I did. Coming back wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't even about closure. It was about choosing where I would begin again on my terms. The inheritance was legal now, but the house didn't feel like mine. Not until I chose to live in it. Not until I decided not to let it rot under the weight of a family's silence. So I repaired it. Slowly. I fixed the hinges on the kitchen cabinets. Replaced the broken fence gate. Replanted the stubborn patch of grass out front. I didn't remove my father's chair from the study. I just added another beside it. And when people asked what I was doing with the space, I told them I'm living in it. Not defending it, not avenging it, just living. And part of that living meant giving what I didn't get. I started showing up twice a week at the Veterans Women's Transition Center across town, not as a guest speaker, not to tell my story. I didn't tell my story at all. I sat in the back, I brought coffee, I folded donated sweaters. And when someone cried during a group session, I didn't try to fix it. I didn't offer platitudes or recycled therapy speak. I just listened. Because once all I ever wanted was for someone in my family to sit with me in silence and not look at me like I was broken. So I became that person for others. Not out of virtue, but out of understanding. Some days I drove home from those sessions and sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the porch light, wondering whether my father would be proud or just confused. But then again, maybe those two weren't so different. There's a drawer in the master bedroom I never filled. Third one down, oak finish, slightly stuck on the left side. It used to hold his cufflinks, his Navy-issued wristwatch, a photograph of him and my mother at some formal event, where they both looked like they'd rather be somewhere else. Now it holds one thing, the medal. The one I didn't ask for, didn't wear, didn't display. Not because I was ashamed, but because it wasn't meant for the wall, it was meant for the drawer, where things live quietly and still matter. Sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd open it, not to hold it, just to see it, to remind myself that what happened in Camp Dagger wasn't just in my head, that the blood I saw, the breath I lost, the silence I endured, they were real, and someone somewhere had written it down, a record even if buried. Next to it, I placed a framed photo of my father, not the official portrait in full uniform, a different one. He's in a flannel shirt holding a half-built model airplane in the backyard. He's laughing mid-sentence, eyes squinting like the sun caught him by surprise. I don't know who took the photo, but it's the only one where he looks like the version of himself I might have spoken to. Had life been simpler? Sometimes when I stared at that drawer, I wondered what would have happened if he had told me everything himself. If he had handed me the medal, not hidden it. If he had faced the family fallout, not left me to do it alone. If he had said, "You deserve this," and looked me in the eye. But life doesn't come with redos. Only moments. And this drawer, this little unremarkable drawer, was one of them. I didn't keep the medal to make peace with the past. I kept it to remind myself that surviving didn't require permission. That recognition doesn't always arrive on time, but it does arrive. And sometimes the most defiant thing a person can do is stay soft. I didn't win. I just refused to lose. And that's enough for me. The folding chair creaked as I shifted my weight, trying to keep still at the far back of the hall. The Fairhaven Memorial for Veterans had always been formal pressed uniforms, pre-approved speeches, a slideshow that hadn't changed since 2012. But this year was different. They said they wanted to honor the quiet heroes. That was my only reason for attending. I didn't come to speak. I didn't come to be seen. I just wanted to sit among others who knew what it meant to give too much and get too little in return. I wore a plain coat, no pins, no ribbons. My medal stayed in my pocket. The ceremony began. One by one, names were read. Stories were told. Applause came in waves, respectful, restrained. I recognized a few people from the support center. Women who used to flinch when spoken to, now standing tall as their stories were shared. It was enough just to witness it. And then the MC stepped up to the mic with a subtle shift in tone. "There's someone here today," he said, "who never asked for the spotlight, who refused to let her silence be mistaken for weakness." I froze. She is not just a veteran. She is a lighthouse to those who were left behind in the dark. She listens when no one else does. She shows up when families don't. She teaches others that dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you never lose. No. He looked down at his notes, then looked up again, searching the crowd. "Lieutenant Serena Maddox," he said, "the woman who gave hope to those rejected by their own blood." And then it happened. One by one, people stood. No dramatic music, no flashing lights. Just the quiet, respectful sound of chairs scraping backward as men and women, young and old, rose to their feet. My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I felt like I might vanish. I wanted to slip away unnoticed back into the fold of the crowd, but I didn't move. I sat there unmoving as the hall stood still. And yet everything in me was shifting. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I'd already cried all the tears I had over not being seen. This wasn't about being seen. This was about being known. And I knew in that moment I didn't have to go up there and speak for anyone to understand what I stood for, because they already did. The applause faded, but the weight of it stayed in my coat. I reached into the pocket and curled my fingers around the cold edge of the medal. Not to show it. Not to lift it up like proof. Just to hold it. The metal was worn around the ridges, now dulled slightly from years of not being touched. It felt heavier than I remembered. I didn't pull it out. Instead, I leaned forward in my seat and whispered, barely loud enough for myself to hear, "I didn't need you to say the words, Dad. You never said you believed me. But you believed in me. And that was enough." It wasn't forgiveness I felt. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, like watching a scar fade and realizing you no longer flinch when someone touches it. The autumn sunlight filtered through the tall stained glass windows, spilling golden hues across the wood-paneled floor. Outside, trees danced with color rust amber and hints of flame, the kind of sky that made you want to sit still and breathe. For years I thought healing would come in one grand moment, a courtroom speech, a banner headline, a sibling apology. But healing, I've learned, rarely looks like a finish line. Sometimes it looks like showing up to a memorial and realizing you no longer need to be invited to belong. Sometimes it sounds like silence because no one's questioning your worth anymore. And sometimes it feels like a medal in your pocket, worn by time but still warm from the hand that never let it go. As people began to leave the hall, someone tapped my shoulder gently. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. She looked barely 20, her eyes tired but steady. "I've been going to your sessions. You probably don't remember me." "I remember," I said softly. She hesitated, then smiled as if surprised by how good it felt to be seen. And then she left. That was all. No more speeches, no grand ending. Just people walking quietly into the afternoon, carrying pieces of each other with them. As I stepped outside, the breeze caught my coat and lifted it slightly, like the wind itself was trying to remind me I no longer needed to carry so much weight. The metal remained in my pocket, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.